It's not cheating. Access for every student is where we're going to get started. Okay, let's see here. So I do work for CAS, specifically the National Center on AIM, Accessible Education Materials. And we want to make sure that our accessibility commitment to you, even though I'm panicking a little bit because you don't have access to my handout. But if you, it seems like some people do have it, which is great. Just you're going to notice that my slides, my handout through this whole session are not super fancy. And friends, I'm coming from an elementary teaching background, and I love me a super fancy font. I love all the things to design a classroom, but I also know it can be the barrier for my students to access text. And I want to make sure that it's not, I'm creating, not creating any barriers for you. So just thinking about the principles of poor, and you're going to have a link to what I mean by poor, but just notice how my slides will be perceivable. I'll have alt text on all of my images. My contrast color is high. I'll have readable font. You have captions that you have available on Zoom to turn those on if in fact that you need those. Operable, I have all slide titles. All of my wording is very understandable and robust. I've checked for accessibility. So the principles of poor, again, you're going to have on my handout, the link is at the end just talking about that. So I want to just go out with accessibility for sure. And as if we were in the classroom, and teaching, anytime we do professional learning, creating those experiences, the learning objectives, just so you know why you're here, you will be able to describe at least 5 usable formats of accessible education materials, or AIM, and then you'll be able to list 3 types of reading. You're going to leave with like a lot of other things. And I know that here you are at the Bookshare Symposium, and I feel like we're probably all on the same page if you're here. So I want to make sure this is meaningful and relevant to all of you, because I know being in the classroom and working for another state project, and this is my position here at CAS, is that the conversation of accessibility, specifically when students use assistive technology, audiobooks, let's talk about that, oftentimes it's considered cheating. Oh, I don't want my students to use that. So I want you to walk away with, maybe we often have to have those conversations, that you will walk away with maybe some things that you can use from this handout in your own professional learning, or perhaps you can have a conversation starter just by some things and activities that we do today. Okay, so the agenda, again, you need to know what the expectation is with me. But I go off the cuff a lot, but I will stay on topic, and I promise you're going to survive me. If you've ever heard me speak, thanks for coming back and not being afraid of me, but you will survive me. So we're going to chit chat quickly about UDL. I am from CAS. I can't go without talking about UDL, and that's the basis of what we're doing today. And then AIM, or Accessible Education Materials, and AT, Assistive Technology. We're going to talk about reading differences, friends. We're going to do a game or two. Now, if you're in professional learning and you just rolled your eyes because you're like, I don't want to do a game, I get you. I hear you. I feel you. It's okay. They're fun things. You don't have to participate. If you do, I may or may not have a prize. Just going to throw that out there. And if I do know you, maybe his name's Brian, I may call you out if I know you. I'll just see. So we're going to talk about data, and then we have questions, but you can ask me questions during this whole time. And we're definitely better together. We have 124 people in this room right now, and I have no doubt that every single one of you brings something that we can all collaborate, build upon, and just be better experience once this session's over. And I'm always grateful for that. So please communicate however you would like to with me and everyone else. So keep sharing. So I'm Kelly Suding. I am a technical assistant specialist at CAS, again, specifically the National Center on Accessible Education Materials. Brian's smiling because he know I'll call him out, which don't do that to your students. I'm just showing you what not to do for your students. So I also like to model that. I do have a background in general ed and special education. Specifically loved every moment of teaching students who needed more intensive supports. So a lot of area supports with students. I focus, my specializations are autism and specific learning disabilities, and then the integration of accessibility in the classroom. So this is right up my alley. This is my wheelhouse. Supporting students using assistive technology was really something that I did on a daily basis, and I've seen so much growth. I see the creating those equitable experiences for students is a game changer, and we're going to talk about why that. And Laura, when I start getting on time, just let me know, because I can't even see my timer anywhere. So, sure. And I'm not even sure what time I stop. So you just have to let me know.
You have an hour.
Okay, so about CAS. So we developed the principles of Universal Design for Learning. We're a nonprofit education agency, research and development through CAS. You're going to have a link through that. This is not about CAS, but you're going to have lots of resources from our at CAS or National Center at AIM. And so what we do at the AIM Center is we help build capacity with states and districts and ensuring that high quality, accessible instruction so all of our students are getting materials in a timely manner. When I say timely manner, friends, I mean at the same time of their peers. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So that's the goal at the National AIM Center. And just so you know, I'm available for you. All of my colleagues are available for you after this. So if you have like follow-up questions or you need supports within your state, reach out to me anytime. And if I'm not the right person, I'll make sure that I direct you to the right person or maybe your state contact. So feel free to reach out. We have universal technical assistance, targeted and more intensive supports. So if you, during this session or during this whole symposium today, if you want to dive deeper on how you can get your states to start that journey, reach out. We have currently, we have a cohort of states now that we're working with intensely, and we would love to have you on board in those conversations for sure. All right. Is anyone feeling like this?
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
Does anyone ever feel like that? If you're in a classroom or you do professional learning or you're a parent and you're trying to get all of your students, all your kiddos, all your colleagues into the same, you're trying to get everyone to the same goal, but we have to think about learner variability and this student needs this and this student needs this. And it really feels more like hurting when you have to stop and direct with specific students when students don't have the appropriate accommodations that they need. So if you are pulling your students out and reading everything to them, you're taking time away from classroom instruction because the students aren't getting those accommodations that they need by using a speech to text. But well, that's going to make a lot more sense, and I'm going to dive deeper about in that. But after this session, I'm really hopeful that you'll realize or start those conversations about how we can get all students to the same goal. It's just how they're going to get there differently, and this is going to be less overwhelming. Once we have students, when we're creating our instruction accessible, students are able to read as fast as they want, as slow as they want, however they need to. That they'll have access with accessibility and specifically assistive technology can be a game changer with behaviors in class, just improving their literacy skills, all the things that we'll be talking about. So access for all. Access for all, universal design for learning. That's our umbrella. We have to think about accessibility with under that umbrella, and then AIM, or accessible education materials and assistive technology. I love this gift so much. So for accessibility, I'm going to describe that. It is a door that we click on the button to open it. Accessibility door, and then it goes to stairs. Okay. So we have to think about when we're creating our environment and our instruction, it's from the start to the finish. So if you are thinking, oh, I've shared a PDF with my student with dyslexia, and now they'll be able to use text to speech, but a PDF doesn't mean it's accessible. Okay. So we have to think about accessibility from the environment to our instruction to all of the things that students can access from the start to the beginning, not one piece. This is has to be a well-oiled machine, and we'll dive a little bit into that. You've been talking about UDL today, probably in many of your sessions today. So UDL, again, I'm not going to go deeply into UDL, but just know that when I'm talking, I'll try to point out specific things that I'm doing that are intentional to kind of demonstrate ways that I'm trying to gauge you, show you, like for you, be able to show you what you know, and me to represent my materials in a different way. So providing multiple means of engagement. So we want to stimulate our students' interests and motivations for learning, right? And then representation, not just sitting talking at, like I could have said, oh my gosh, does it feel like you're herding cats? And some of you would have been like, I don't even understand what that means. I don't know what herding means. Then I show you a video, is sort of representing what I'm trying to say, matched with that visual to represent what my goal is to you understand what I'm trying to say during that time. Action and expression, just different ways for students to show you what they know, right? A paper and pencil test, friends, is not going to be accessible for all of our students. It will be for some, but if we really want our students to be able to show you what they know, then we have to really think about accessibility. Okay, so UDL, I always think it just broadens our lens. So this is a video of a coffee shop that gets robbed, and the individuals run out to their car, and the police officers were called, and they're sitting in the car. Police officers get out of the car, and then they drive off. Okay, drive off. And the officers come out and say, oh my gosh, what happened? Now, I show this because broadening our lens, oftentimes when we're working with students who maybe are struggling in the classroom, let's just say a reading difficulty, let's just say dyslexia. I'll probably just say dyslexia a lot just for purposes of talking about that. So oftentimes when we have a student with a learning disability, the behaviors are what is being seen. So if you get called into the classroom or you're thinking about those students who are in there who punches their friend every time they go into math class, you have to go in and support that student. What we're seeing is that behavior, okay? When we think about universal design for learning, we're really thinking about walking in and maybe Johnny is on the autism spectrum and the lights in the ceiling are humming, but you know that. And so they're humming in the ceiling. You've already created those relationships to understand what your students' needs are and thinking about learner variability. Maybe Johnny in math class doesn't have access to text to speech because there's a substitute in there. And now he's super upset because it's way easier to punch his friend than Johnny to say, I can't read the directions to this math test. So we're dealing with those behaviors. So think about diving deep into the principles of universal design for learning. If anything, just allowing you to open and see everything in the environment, specifically for the students, and really thinking about learner variability. And I'm happy, I don't know if that video is on your handout, but I'll make sure that I'll put it on there for you. Because if you're thinking about behaviors, if behavior is predictable, friends, it's preventable, okay? If behavior is predictable, it's preventable. So instead of every day going in when you know Johnny's going to come in and punch his friend, you don't put all these pads on his friend and say, get ready, friend, you're going to get punched today because it's math class. We're proactive in it. We find ways to support that student so we can prevent those behaviors. And UDL really can do that when you are implementing and using that on a daily basis, aligned with accessibility. So accessibility is a big part of this whole symposium. Accessibility, we're talking audio, right? Audio versions of books, that's accessibility for students who prefer auditory reading. So accessibility it's shaped by what we do and our interactions with the environment, okay? Or our personal preferences. Many of us use assistive technology and just for convenience. If you use text to speech with your phone, just for writing, all of these for conveniences. But when we think about real accessibility, a person with a disability can acquire the same information, okay, can engage in the same interactions and enjoy the same services. And I emphasize the word same because this is where sometimes we hear the word cheating, and I'll go into that in just a second. So in equally effective, equally integrated manner with substantially equivalent ease of use. So it's not more work for the students because what we are giving them is already accessible, okay? They're not having to take a picture of a page of a book and then turn on all of these third-party apps in order to read, okay? The book is already accessible for them, or the reading passage is already accessible to them. But they're engaging in that same information, and how they're going to interact and get there is going to be different as a person without a disability. And when we think about accessibility in our instruction, which is a big part of this whole hour with me, is that AIM is print and technology-based educational materials that are designed to enhance, to make them most usable, okay? Usable across the widest range of learner variability, regardless of the format. Okay, so that is your reading passage you're giving to a student can be made into different formats. It could be Braille, it could be large print, it could be audio. Maybe we're turning it to a transcript for video. All of those things is what's going to make that accessible, that instruction, and students should have access to it. And thinking of universal design for learning, when we're creating our instruction accessible, any student can use it. Okay. We have some students, I'm sure none of your students ever say this, or any of your colleagues, when they say that's not fair. Johnny gets to use the iPad when he's reading and I have to read this book, right? I'm sure none of your students have ever said that. My students would say that all the time. Okay, so just thinking about how we access information and just having it available. If your student came in with eye fatigue or forgot their glasses, you're already prepared for them to use their iPad or their earbuds to access that information. And I loved someone, when I was at this UDL Institute, he said that he had a student who had blindness, low vision, and the student read Braille. He had the Braille book in there, reading Braille, and the student came up and says, "That's not fair. Billy gets to use the Braille book and I can't use it." And so the teacher's like, "Knock yourself out, friend. Knock yourself out." It wasn't accessible to him, but he had the option to try it if he wanted to. So kids know, especially when it comes to high stakes work, that if they know that maybe text to speech, they're not proficient in using it, they're not going to use it. So just having it available for everyone. And we can do that when we have it made accessible, and doing that with assistive technology. So just the definition of assistive technology is any piece of equipment or product that commercially modified or customized that's used to increase, maintain, and just improve the functional capabilities of any individual with a disability. Okay, so that's what I mean by assistive technology. So that could be speech to text, text to speech, your screen readers, your word prediction. That's the AT that I'm talking about. In order for them all to work, feel free to let me know in the chat if you are an educator, you're in the classroom. I should have asked that earlier, or if you create materials for any individuals, that would be awesome if you could just pop that in the chat. If you're comfortable, I invite you to, but it's not necessary. So when AIM works, we have our materials, okay? The information or the content that we're giving our students, and then the technology also has to be available for that student. So let's talk about our student with dyslexia who needs to use text to speech. My materials are created, my AIM, and then it's put onto, let's say, an iPad, that technology piece. And in the technology piece, there's either a built-in setting, which is accessible technologies, where the student can use that built-in setting of their iPad in order for it to use text to speech, okay? The text to speech would be the AT part. So all three of those things have to work together for a student to be able to access their instruction. Thank you so much for putting all of that in there. This visual here, I invite you to use that, because oftentimes this is some educators struggle with this, because they say, well, they have an iPad, they already have an iPad, they can just, it's all digital, okay? But digital doesn't mean it's accessible. It just means it's available. So when you can really give that visual of all three pieces working, and that's really a true opportunity for students to access the text in the way that they learn best. Oh yeah, we've got lots of brilliance in here. So please share anything in the chat box to contribute to any of this. And I know that I talk fast because I get really excited. And so I'll try to slow down, but I may not. But you have access to all these, and you can, again, ask me questions anytime. And friends, it's the law, right? It's the law. If you have to, bring that out of your back pocket, IDEA focuses on accessible formats of printed instruction in a timely manner for qualifying students. Bookshare has, eligible students, and I'm sure they'd be happy to put that link in there to dive deep into that. But this, if you have more questions on just creating AIM and creating accessibility, I could spend a whole day teaching you how to create your instructions, your materials accessible, but this is not what it's about. This is more about the why. But this resource, this tip, if it's an easy, let's see, I'm going to put that in the chat box. A great printable to help you get started on creating your materials. Okay, so that's at CAS. You're welcome to use it anytime. That's the law. So accommodations, my whole time spent with you is talking about accommodations, not modifications. These are students who, if they can comprehend at grade level, should have access to grade level curriculum. Assistive technology does not replace the skills of teaching. It's parallel for our students when they're working on those independent tasks. If you were in the session earlier, the panel with Bookshare and Bruce Alter, he definitely talked about that. And I loved how that he brought that up. It's parallel. It's not students are getting further behind on the content if they don't have that accommodation that they need to stay up with the content when they don't have accessible formats and assistive technology. So we don't want them to get further behind, yet we're still teaching those skills of reading or whatever that task is. We're not replacing it. It's parallel. Thanks for putting that in the chat box. So accommodations. So accommodations does not change the curriculum at all, okay? And the expectation is not lowered. It's just how that student is going to access and express that knowledge. That's the accommodation. Again, our junior in high school, beginning reading levels, first grade, but can comprehend at grade level. This student may have dyslexia. This student may have everything in a digital accessible format where they use text to speech the whole time. And they're also able to gain all of that content as same as their peers. Because if you take that away just because their decoding level is at first grade, lack of knowledge does not mean lack of intelligence. It's just they're not able to gain that knowledge because things are not accessible to them. That's a big difference, huge difference. But when our students don't have that knowledge, what happens to those students socially, emotionally, mentally, all of those things are just I'll talk about that, could really change the trajectory of one's life. So modifications, when we start modifying material, so Johnny's our junior in high school, beginning reading level is first grade. Now let's just say we're going to modify the material. Johnny, you only read the first paragraph of this book. All your peers are going to read the whole chapter. I want you to come back, practice that first paragraph, and you only answer the questions that pertain to that first paragraph. Okay. Think about how our student feels at that time. They're not getting all of the content. If that whole chapter was read aloud to him, he would be able to comprehend that. The expectation is lowered, and our students know when we have low expectations of them. So modifications lowers that expectations and the knowledge of essential skills by changing and customizing the curriculum for the students. So my time with you is really advocating for equitable opportunities for our students with accessibility in mind. So accommodations versus modifications. So thinking about UDL and AIM and AT, accommodations look like this. We think of UDL. Thanks so much for putting who you are in here. So UDL's choice that's built in the environment. AIM or accessible materials is the same content, but in an accessible format. And then the assistive technology is differing ways of accessing, interacting, and responding to that content. Okay. I hope that is clear. If it's not, reach out to me. And if we have a few minutes at the end, we're happy to chat about that. All of you, your brains that are in the chat as well, feel free to support one another. But those are what accommodations look like. So when we think about accommodations, sometimes we think, oh, if I read everything to my student, I think that's the best way. So in the IEP, it's read a lot accommodation. So read a lot accommodation doesn't mean that an adult is reading everything to a student, because we can become the barrier, right? We can become the unnecessary barrier. And I love sharing my failures. I have tons of them. Oh my gosh, in the classroom, if I could write a book, I think we all could. But as long as we have a growth mindset and open up like, oh my gosh, this is why this happened. I was working with my student, we'll call him Johnny, and we're working on a math assignment. He really struggled on this specific content. And I was like, today he's going to get it. So I had all of these things that I thought were engaging, manipulatives, all these visuals, all these things. I had the directions, and I pulled him out of class, which I should not have. He could have easily been in the class. So that was my first mistake. And then I said, so I talked for like 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes with directions. And then I put all of those in, and I said, okay, are you ready now? And he looked at me and he said, are you growing a mustache? And I was like, no, but my mistake was I had talked too much. maybe I was talking too fast. Maybe he needed the directions a little bit slower. Maybe he needed them faster than what I was saying. And he lost because I had too many words. I was speaking at my own pace, and I was super animated by it. And that had thrown him off. I became the barrier. So had he been able to have that math instruction on his iPad or his Chromebook for where he could have read those directions as many times as he needed, as fast as they're slow, I would not have become the barrier, and he would have been able to participate and have control of his learning. So that was a big one of my mustache moments, and my most expensive one after the spa later. So accommodations, friends. This is a great example of accommodation.
Oh my goodness, right?
His
Here,
birthday.
Right there. Blow. What did you? You go open your mouth and blow. Do it. Hold on.
Go down, Daddy. Go down.
Slow down. So Dad leaves
There.
and comes back.
There. Ready? Blow. There you go. Yay!
Wow.
Good job, buddy.
Now eat it.
Now you want
So I love
I've got home internet from T-Mobile. It only costs.
that. Okay, slideshow here. Back on track. So I love that. So what Dad could have done is what sometimes as educators we do, we don't want our students to fail. So what Dad could have done was got down really close to the candle and said, okay, Johnny, on 3, let's blow out the candle. And then who really blows out the candle? Right? Dad really blows out the candle. So in thinking of ways that he was like, oh, he needs to blow out his candle himself, that straw was a game changer. Having students be able to use text to speech or speech to text or whatever assistive technologies that they need in order to gain that information is crucial. So I loved about that. So no candle blowing, friends. Let's find ways that our students can be independent, because the greatest predictor of reading growth is just time spent reading. Okay. So some of you may be using the captions now, which is considered time spent reading. Anytime that students are being read to or text to speech, time spent reading. So if our students are waiting around for adults to read everything to them, they're missing out on so much time reading when in fact they can use that text to speech for time spent reading. That's the only way our students going to improve, is that time around text and be able to engage and interact with that text. Okay. So before we go any further, you have to answer this question to stay in this session. If you don't get it, you get booted out. Okay. Are you ready? And you are welcome to put it in the chat box. And I think I might just give you 5 seconds. We got a lot of AT supervisors in here. Okay. Here's a question. If you wouldn't mind just putting the answer in the chat box. Stop being defiant, chunk it out, sound it out. I need you to try harder. Try harder. Oh my gosh, recess is not going to be had. You all are you growing a mustache? Casey, Cassie, you're my people. Anyone still waiting? Okay, so this is just going to, oh, how old are you? Friend in the house gets a prize who actually got that. How old are you? Okay. So all of you, you don't have to answer. Don't panic. Oh, you don't have to answer it. But did you know how old you are? Yeah, most of us know how old we are. And so let's think about that. Was that a fair assessment of your knowledge? Right? I gave you that question in a different language. And I love that someone knew the answer to that. I can't even remember what language I used for that. So what was that was not a fair assessment of your knowledge. Was it a fair assessment of that language? Absolutely. Right. If this was a test on that specific language, which I think may have been Danish, I'm not sure. Then yes, but for your ability to respond to that content, no. Okay. So if a student with a reading disability, such as, oh, thank you, Joyce, reading disability, such as dyslexia, and you're giving them a printed, I'm going to say worksheet. Okay. I'm just going to say worksheet. I don't want to say worksheet, but I can't think of another word. Reading passage. Let's just say reading passage. And you give them a printed reading passage and their decoding level is below that reading. They're never going to be able, that's not a fair assessment of their content. of that content to respond because of that learning disability. So that's where that accommodation of assistive technology would be creating that equitable opportunity. Okay, test time again, friends. Thanks for putting in false answers just to look like you did something. Thanks. Okay, so this one, you may or may not win money for this, all right? And your picture may or may not be on a website, like a real big website. Here we go. Now, you have 5 seconds. With your non-dominant hand, type your first and last name in the chat box. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, one person. Laura, I don't know who this group is that you sent with me, but they're being defiant. They're not wanting to do any of the work. I clearly gave great directions. And they're still, look, they're thinking that I'm still like my head's turned and my eyes aren't on them and I don't see them typing. All right. I love that you're still typing in there because some of you are like, I'm completing that task and working with students. And if they don't have that complete task, that's when they take their shoes off and throw them at you, depending on where they're at. All right. So you failed, friends, you failed. Okay. So let's think about that with our students. You didn't know what was coming up. You didn't know what the goal was or the expectations. Think of our students of, I know Joy, she wanted to, but she failed, right? You want to so bad. Lack of executive functioning skills, okay? Think about organization. Maybe typing is your barrier. Processing time. Maybe I asked you that, I gave you 5 seconds, and some of you are like, wait, what? And then you panic. You're like, oh my gosh. And I didn't say speech to text. Why not? Why couldn't you just set it and then it would have typed for you? What am I measuring? Okay. Typing, you feel angered. If I would have just said, you are going to get a week's vacation from your school this year, if you would have gotten that right, you would have been so mad at me right now. You'd be like, that is not fair. That is not fair. And that's how our students feel, right? When they don't have these supports, especially with processing time, could be a huge thing. I worked with a student who you ask him a question and his processing time every time was 2 minutes and 49 seconds before he could respond. Okay. Now the combination for him was just having another way for him to respond. He knew I would see it 2 minutes and 49 seconds later by entering it on a shared doc. So that really has to be mindful when we're thinking about that and how our students fail. Okay. Decoding the content and interacting with and responding, they're all different skill sets. So this is what I mean by that. I'm going to go back to my junior in high school. My junior in high school's beginning reading level is 1st grade. Comprehension level is at 11th, junior in high school, but he can comprehend at grade level. Again, that student should have access to grade level curriculum, my friends. And I just want you to if you walk away with anything, just know, and a couple sessions earlier that I attended said almost the same thing about accommodation, accessibility in different grades, in different classes. So math class, any test or assessment a student is given, there's 2 things that's being tested first before they can even be tested on the content. So if we're saying math, first, it's a test of accessibility. Can my student interact and engage with this paper and pencil, right? Do they have their glasses? It's a test of accessibility. And then it's a test of reading. Every single test or assessment that you give a student is a test of reading, because if that student can't decode the directions to the math test, they're never going to be able to show you what they know on the math. Okay. So this is why it's so key for our students to have things that are accessible to them in a way that they can engage, interact, and respond. Again, because lack of knowledge is not lack of intelligence. And certainly dyslexia is not indicative to one's intelligence, even though often they feel that. Okay. I love the Cheeto dust on my non-dominant hand. I'm going to save this chat box so I can read all of those in there. So widespread specific learning disability, just for time's sake, I'm just you have this, and just know that 13 to 14% of the school population nationwide are identified as qualifies for special ed services. All right. I'm going to jump down to dyslexia. Up to 15 to 20% of the world's population have signs of dyslexia. So in thinking about that, if you have 30 kids in your classroom or you're working with 30 adults, how many of yours are adults or individuals have signs of dyslexia or perhaps a reading disability? That's a huge number. So we can't assume that we go into any environment that everyone can engage and interact in what we're giving them. if we make it accessible and all of those in for where they can change, yes, thank you, Joyce, they can change the formats, change the font, the contrast, that's going to be the game changer, right? That's creating an equitable opportunity for all individuals who are there. Now, I come from Indiana, but I just challenge you to look up your state about the fourth graders who are not proficient in reading. This is Indiana's data a few years back. So Black 78%, Latino 71%, and white 56%. I show you this just to challenge you to look up your state and see the percentage of fourth graders not proficient in reading. And I'll just leave that there. So reading and speaking, this is just a graphic of how when I read or I speak, for me, it's super fluid. I always feel like it's just from automatic. I can automatically create phonemic awareness, vocabulary, grammatical structure, and I can connect the sentences. It's super fluid for me. I don't even have to think about it. When I'm a reader also, it's pretty much the same thing, okay? So just know that this is the structure of that. And if we have a learning disability, it may not be that way. If you've not taken Made by Dyslexia's Microsoft Dyslexia workshop certificate for certification, it's amazing. And they talk about how, you know, the dyslexic brain may not go from point A to point B, but taking the back roads, and that's okay, right? And that's okay. Just how we're going to get there eventually is what's going to be the game changer. So this is game time. So Brian's probably going to mute himself and act like he left the building, and which is fine. Yeah, Aaron, go to Made by Dyslexia and type in Microsoft, and you will find those credentials. And it's an incredible short amount of videos that you can look up. And I'll try to put those in that doc as well. So MadGab, has anyone ever played MadGab? You're welcome to unmute yourself or put it in the chat or thumbs up. Oh, we have this game. It's a fun game on a Saturday night with your friends, if you know what I mean. Yes, it is fun. Okay. Okay, no. So what happens is we're going to practice this. Oh, wow. Made this game and sold it. Wow. Meredith, this is amazing. Make sure you tell them I'm showing it now. The developer MadGab. So we're going to just read this first sentence together, okay? And I invite you all to unmute yourself because it would be way more fun. But if you don't feel safe, you don't have to. You don't have to. I'm going to read it out loud too. So I'm going to read out loud, and we're going to have 5 seconds, and you're going to put in the chat box what it says, what we're saying. Okay, no worries, Clarissa. Don't have a mic, no worries. Just put it in the chat box. I'm going to read this out loud. Feel free to unmic yourself, and so I can laugh at you. That's the whole point of this, so we can laugh at each other. Here we go. Read that aloud.
Tracy who didn't.
What'd you say? Put it in the chat. Keep reading it.
A straight A student.
Boom, a straight A student. Winners in the house. Thank you for unmiking and trying. Right, we're like laughing at ourselves. Okay, nice job, friends. Straight A student. Okay, now this time, you're not going to read it out loud. Okay, Crystal, hearing others helped me. Perfect. Okay, now I want you to read this in your head silently and then put it in the chat box when you know it. You're going to have 5 seconds. Whoop. No, you can't read it out loud. Ooh, okay. Shar, I hope I pronounced your name right, is correct. A dark rain cloud. Look at you all missing your recess again for not getting the right answer. Catherine's like, right. Okay, what I want you to think about is when you heard it out loud, you knew what you were reading. But when you were silently reading and you weren't getting that auditory feedback, friends, we really struggled. Okay. Audrey, take care of you in those storms. We don't want that to happen. Hope I didn't jinx it more with the dark rain cloud. Okay. Now, we're going to do this, but we're going to blow through this quickly. Read out loud. We're just going to try a couple more. Ready? Read it out loud. Unmute yourself.
Can you see what I see?
What I see.
Can you see what I see?
Can you see
what I see? What I see? Can
you see what I see?
I hear it. Yes. Can you see what I see? Well done, friends. Okay, silent. Good job. Good job, friends. Read silently. 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No one wins. Oh my
Krispy
God.
Kreme donuts.
Oh, Krispy Kreme
Wow.
donuts. Ah, yeah. And how many did it bug you when I was counting down also? Were you like, be quiet, I gotta read. What do your ears have to do with your eyes? Oh, what does it have to do?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, think about that. Okay, and Krispy Kreme donuts, if you don't have background knowledge of that and you have a reading disability, that's not going to happen, right? The countdown definitely throws you off. Yes. Do any of you, when you're driving somewhere, you have your music blaring and then you have your map on, but when you start getting close to the turn, you turn the music down because you can't turn your steering wheel unless you turn the music down. It's all connected. So yeah, most of us have to do that. So just think about our students in those environments. All right. Does anyone want to give it a try by themselves? Unmute yourself and say yes.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, please. First, yes, please. Okay, here we go. If you get this, I may have a prize for you. You're gonna have to email me for it though. Here we go.
Wait, do I read this out loud or in my head?
Out loud.
Okay. Only to aches aim that hit. Only
3,
late
2, 1. Does anyone have it?
Only takes a minute.
Oh, got it. Only takes a minute.
Woo, woo, woo.
I can't tell if that was my friend saying it who got it out loud.
Diana Riggs.
Okay. Hey, shoot me an email. I'll give you my email for a prize.
Awesome.
Yay. Congratulations on, that really important game we just played. The life-changing game of Mad Gaps. All right. So
Callie, excuse me. We're coming up to about 15 minutes left.
Thank you.
Just to keep that in mind for
woohoo.
answers.
Okay. 15 minutes. Okay. This is where my auction voice starts coming out. All right. So thanks for playing that. What I was replicating is not a simulation by any means. It's a simulation of a reading disability, but it does put you in an uncomfortable spot when you're reading aloud and then people are kind of giggling at you and you start getting anxiety. You're just like, oh gosh, I don't want to get it wrong. When we think about our students who are with like a reading disability, who have to read out loud, and how they feel about that when they struggle with reading. Okay. It's like, what are we measuring? Like all of those things. We go from, I put you in a position where you went from automatic to manual and how uncomfortable that you get with that. So think about that feeling and how our students feel. I'm not saying that students shouldn't read aloud, but students should be set up for success to where maybe they know what they're going to read. So then they can have supports and practice that before, in fact, they have to read that. Okay. So thanks for playing that. This is so much fun in person. If you're ever at a conference I'm at and I do this session, come in because it's so much fun in person. It gets crazy wild. So I wish I had a label. So some disabilities look like this. So we have an individual with a cane in a wheelchair and crutches. If we have any of our students walk in the classroom, we're all super accommodating, giving large print, audio, braille, physical access. Accommodations aren't even questions. So I'm focusing on the student who's at the very bottom where we cannot see the disability. Friends, just because we can't see the disability does not mean it's less crucial to provide them with those accommodations. Okay. They need to access in a different way, but just because we can't see it doesn't mean that we should not support our students. And if you're often seeing lots of behaviors, really step back and see what's going on. Find that core behavior, and it could come down to a learning disability and totally rock that student's world when they have things accessible to them. Okay. Now, shaming readers. So a leading psychological expert on the general topic of shame believes that the level of shame associated with reading disabilities often matches in intensity the shame experience over incest. Okay. Now, that's a really heavy thing to talk about. It's a really heavy thing to think about. I want you just to reflect. Think about your students, think about your friends. Maybe you're in this position where you feel shameful because you're not considered a reader, okay? Maybe your auditory reading is your strength, right? Visual and auditory mixed together, that's your strength. But this is how our students feel. They feel like it's a part of them. They're not going to be anything else. And oftentimes that's just because they've not had those opportunities to engage, interact, and respond to the content in the best way that they know how. I've worked with so many students who have told me that they wanted to kill themselves. I've had students who have screamed. He found out he had dyslexia. He was a popular kid in school and he just screamed and he said, I wish I was blind so my dyslexia would go away. This is where our students are feeling. And we can change that. with high expectations, presuming competence, and creating everything accessible for our students, we can support our students who may be feeling this way. This is real stuff, okay? High expectations, friends.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behavior is now set for the rest of their lives. And, when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
We will just leave that there. Just one thing, we're not going to be candle blowers, and never be that lid, friends. Never be that lid. When our students feel that, they don't go beyond that, because that's how they felt their entire life. And as educators and any individuals that we work with, we absolutely have the power to change that. And with those accessibility in mind, Chris, I really like that comment in there. I wish that we could dive deep into that. That's a huge question about state testing, standardized testing. Yes, I hear you. I just want you to know that you're seen. Reach out to me, have a conversation with that. We should have a whole group, right? A whole Facebook group talking about all of this. I think it would be amazing. High expectations, but it's not always obvious, right? We can't, again, that image where we can't see the dyslexia. This would be me. I'm that mom who would just watch my son have the water splashed in, but it's not always obvious. So I've heard the term UPAR talked about in every session I've been in today. I've not seen the data. Just know that Universal Protocol for Accommodations in Reading is gives you a way for students to be able to read independently, read with a human reader sounding voice and a text reader, and then it shows which accommodation where they are the most proficient in which accommodation allows them to be most proficient in comprehension. So this is what I mean. I have quite a few of these data points, so I encourage you to look at that handout to look at those. So, for example, UPAR silently read. This is a 4th grade student who was 20% proficient in comprehension at 3rd grade, which makes me think that this student's probably lower than that. But when the student used text to speech and text reader voice, was 29% proficient at 6th grade content. That's huge. And 50% with a human audio. That doesn't mean that's a human is reading. That just means a more human sounding voice. And UPAR has changed a little bit now. Okay. This is actually a student that I worked with, a senior in high school who could not pass that stinking test to graduate high school. Okay. And he was repeating. So they had him as a 4th grade decoding beginning reading level. He was 75% proficient in comprehension questions when he silently read. Remember that game we played? Okay. But with text to speech, friends, he was 92% proficient in comprehension by having text to speech. This is a kiddo who his whole school career did not have things accessible to him. So this is the student who said he had a lot of trauma in his background. He was taken out from his home and had to move in with grandma. And the first thing he said was, "Please tell my grandma I'm not stupid. Please call her." This is where our students are feeling. All he needed was text to speech. Of course, he graduated with that test because we got the accommodations for him. He used all audiobooks and he was able to graduate. So UPAR really gives you that really beautiful piece of data to see what the appropriate accommodations are for your students. It's not, this is a 7th grader, again, 75% proficient at grade level, but was only 75% proficient with decoding at 1st grade level. Game changer, being able to recognize that. Okay. This is data that definitely can be used to support finding out what that accommodation is. And it also will, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. You'll find some students who don't benefit from using text to speech accommodation, and they still need those more intensive supports. But that's really good data to reflect on. Okay. So that's UPAR data. The national research, friends, 74% of children who are poor readers in the 3rd grade remain poor readers in the 9th grade, okay, and are 4 times less likely to graduate by age 19 than a child who does not read proficiently by that time. These numbers make me want to weep. I don't know about you. I have a feeling you all probably feel that too. And sometimes the barriers, us as educators. Yeah, Constance, I hear you. I'm just going to leave that slide there. So we think about reading, visual readers, tactile, auditory. Some of us may be visual and tactile, auditory all at once, or visual, tactile, visual and auditory. When they're using Bookshare, they're having the words highlighted as they're reading, and that's supporting literacy skills, time spent reading. It doesn't matter. What matters is if students can access the text when their comprehension is at grade level, for them to be independent. And that's where those accessibility, the accommodations of AIM and AT come into play for our students. And I have a lot of teachers who print this out. Just the definition of literacy, friends, is by the International Literacy Association, is the ability to identify, understand, interpret, compute, and communicate using, listen to this, visual, audible, and digital materials across disciplines in any context. It does not say just visual, okay? That is not accessible for all of our students. Audible, digital, literacy, definition of literacy, just think about that and how we can support our students. We want to empower them. I love this so much, this image of a young child who's in first place looks super sad because the third place winner is just like celebrating like it's Saturday night and so excited. And that's what we can do for our students. I'm not sure what grade you teach or what, individuals that you work with, when they have been struggling with reading. I know I'm specifically talking about reading here when it comes to assistive technology, but we know that assistive technologies for physical barriers, all different other barriers, is that we celebrate that. I remember a fifth grader for the very first time had an iPad with all his material, all his books on the iPad, read a whole chapter by himself in the hallway with his iPad. And we both cried. And he was a fifth grader who thought that he couldn't read. He was a super strong auditory reader, friends. And once he discovered that, he was a student. He's like, I'm not reading. I hate to read. I hate to read. And that's easier to say that you hate to read instead of saying I can't read, right? That's just an easy out. I mean, I've done things like that my whole life. Like, oh yeah, my back hurts. That's why I didn't run that marathon today, when really I can't run the marathon, but I want to make sure that I look cool. So celebrating those moments, no matter if that's that senior in high school or if it's an adult that you're working with, we can still empower them to find the love of reading. It's so important. Okay. Now, and we can do that with assistive technology, removing those barriers. You're going to have tons of resources on that handout from the National Center on AIM. Reach out to me, reach out to my colleagues anytime to support your state. We're the nonprofit agency through CAST that can support. We have an awesome podcast, the Accessible Learning Experience, that I invite you to go to and look at those. But we have tons of guides, study guides to help support your students immediately. So reach out to me if there's something specific. The National Center on AIM is just like a golden ticket. And you have a whole team behind you if you did not know that or not, okay? So meaningful and relevant, we're gonna wrap it up here with this one last story of my student with spaghetti. I had a student in junior high who loved spaghetti, and you probably heard this if you've ever heard me speak, is that he loved spaghetti. He ate spaghetti for lunch, breakfast, dinner, put it on his ice cream, would draw spaghetti, throw spaghetti all the time. Spaghetti was his thing. He had a learning disability. He was also on the autism spectrum. He really could use some friends. So in the school that he went to, they had student of the month. And so what happens as student of the month, your picture gets hung up in the hallway, and then it lists your name and all these things that you like to do. So then his peers can find commonalities with him to engage and interact, okay, to build up relationships. So I went into the school and I said, hey, Johnny, oh my gosh, I saw his picture up there. It said Johnny, and then it said his favorite food, and it said fries. Okay. F-R-I-E-S. It said fries. I found Johnny. I'm really shortcutting the story, but I found Johnny. Johnny, oh my gosh, man, congratulations. This is amazing. You're student of the month. And I said, but I don't understand. You put spaghetti. What made you put fries and not spaghetti? He said, I couldn't spell it. Okay. He couldn't spell it. And that's what our students do. They change who they are to fit into the culture, fit into the curriculum, instead of us coming to him. He was handed this piece of paper. He had no idea what it was really for. No one explained to him how meaningful and relevant it was. He didn't have the accommodations. If he could have used speech to text or word prediction or spell check or something, he could have just said spaghetti or started typing it out phonetically with using an assistive technology tool for spaghetti to come up. And that made me super sad. So we're going to end on this, and it's super quick, Laura, I promise.
Next
thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. Really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, you know, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
I say, friends, that's a great way to end. Thanks for being here so much.